VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you, Mr. Morris. Good to have you with us on Crosstalk today, and we welcome our listeners all across the network. Before we get down to business today, I have some very special words I would like to say regarding one of our networks that is a recipient of Crosstalk every day, and we are so grateful. We have a number of radio networks, I think, and if I start naming them, I'm going to be in trouble here, but of special recognition today is the Lighthouse Broadcasting Network down there in Danville, Kentucky, and they are having their share-a-thon, as they have 1170 AM radio and 88.1 FM, and they're having their share-a-thon, and I just want the people listening over the network to understand that we would not be on this network except that the network has provided the airtime. This means that the network is paying the cost of having Crosstalk on the air. And so I would urge you to communicate with our friends there at the Lighthouse Broadcasting Network. Thank them for putting Crosstalk on the air, because they are the ones to be thanked. They have had us on now for many years, and we're just grateful to be a part of the listening family there from Danville, Kentucky. And our best to all the staff there, and for Mildred Drake and all the team, we just wish you God's best. And as the share-a-thon is on the air, be prayerful for them as well. Okay, now we have a number of other items here. First of all, let me say this, that as I was listening to Rush over the weekend, over the lunch hour, not the weekend, the lunch hour, and Rush was talking about the fact that some of the news organizations are literally contradicting themselves. The contradictions are flowing back and forth on this issue of polling. The polls oversampling of one side or the other and making interesting rhetoric, the kind of thing that makes people want to throw in the towel or say, I'm not going to vote, or confusion. Well, we're going to be talking about this. In other words, if we gave our program a title today, it would be 2012 Election, What is at Stake? And with us today is a good friend and a man who is the best friend that you and your church could have dealing with defending the right things. His name is Matt Staver, the founder of the Ministry of Liberty Counsel. He's the president, founder, I believe, General Counsel. He has a wonderful team of attorneys, and this organization has grown over the years. And, Matt, we're just so grateful for you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you. And thank you for all of your great support over the many years.
Wow, well, how many years has it?
It's been a long time.
You sent me.
You have been a long supporter of Liberty Counsel, and this station and this network has been a long supporter of Liberty Counsel. And
because
we've aired some of our programs on here for many years.
I remember.
I'm not quite sure exactly how long, but it's going back to the mid-'90s, I think, at least.
Well, when I stepped down for physical reasons, I think you sent me a plaque of 10 years, and
yes.
That was several years ago. So
that was, yeah, that's right. It was several years. That's right.
But it's been a privilege, Matt, and I remember the days when we hooked up an ISDN unit in your office, and it was sitting on a writing desk, and you slip in there today. You have a lot more facilities going for you with the television and everything, and we're just thrilled to have you on.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
Matt, we're going to be talking about the issue that there are many people today that are saying, what's the use? I'm not going to vote anyway. The next thing you hear, of course, after these debates, you hear the pundits saying, well, it's all over now. It's all over, after you hear of a bump in the public opinion polls. All of these things are items that we should be concerned about, and the election is at stake. Now, before we hit that, there's one other question which I'm concerned about. Last week, another federal court struck down DOMA.
Yeah.
Does this mean that DOMA is dead, or what's happening?
No, it doesn't mean that it's dead. And in fact, the federal district court in that same case, in the lower court, actually struck down that law first. It's part of DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act.
Mm-hmm.
And And that was petitioned to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court currently has that on its docket to determine whether to take the case. Now that the Court of Appeals, the same case, has actually come down and agreed and struck it down with a 2-1 decision, there's no question but that the Supreme Court will take the case, because whenever a Court of Appeals strikes down a law, not at a lower court, but a Court of Appeals strikes down a law that's a federal law, then it's an automatic review of the U.S. Supreme Court. So this case will be on this current term's docket, and that means it'll be decided by no later than June of 2013. It's just a matter of time now before the Supreme Court makes it official that it'll take the case. Now, what's at stake there is the definition of marriage, not the full faith and credit clause. That's a second part of DOMA. That provision says that one state does not have to recognize another state's same-sex marriage or unions. That's not what was at issue. What was at issue is the definition of marriage section of DOMA, where it says marriage for federal purposes is the union of one man and one woman. So if you're wanting to file joint tax returns for federal purposes, the definition of spouse and deductions and so forth like that would be according to the one man, one woman marriage. If you're having some kind of Social Security benefits, survivor benefits, or something of that nature, it would be based upon the common understanding of marriage. And that's really what's at stake. Now, that will be before the U.S. Supreme Court, whether or not that federal definition of marriage for federal purposes, for federal benefits, is in conflict with the Constitution. Now, obviously, we know it's not, but we also know that the Supreme Court has become politicized, and they don't always go by just the Constitution. So if the Supreme Court agrees that this is unconstitutional, if it's a 5-4 decision to strike it down, what's the impact? Well, the impact will be that it strikes down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act section, and therefore 2 people of the same sex can file joint tax returns. 2 people of the same sex can get Social Security survivor benefits when one dies. But the bigger impact is, what about all these state constitutional provisions? There's 31 of those states that have passed constitutional provisions saying that marriage is the union of one man and one woman. What happens to them? It doesn't have a direct effect, but the next lawsuit will be against those, and it'll use this case and likely strike those down as well. So what's at stake is the definition of marriage, and that's huge. Now, putting it in the context of the election, what's at stake? What's at stake is there may be 1 or 2 more justices that are retiring, and vacancies and nominations and appointments over the next 4 years for this next president. And depending upon who those are, if they were to step down, if a Scalia, a Thomas, an Alito, for example, step down, then if they were replaced by someone like, say, Sotomayor or Kagan, that was just nominated over the last 4 years and confirmed, then the Supreme Court would take a completely different direction on life, on marriage, on other kinds of liberties. We would lose the direction of the Supreme Court towards judicial activism for probably the rest of our lives.
And folks, this is why it's important to vote, because you're not just talking about a president here. You're talking about an entire justice system that was designed with the reference toward law and the basics of law that come to us even from the Ten Commandments. And what you're seeing now is people reinterpreting the law, or, dare we say, even legislating from the bench.
And here's an example. I just argued a case, Vic, at what's called the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. It was out in Colorado, but it was for a New Mexico case, and that covers New Mexico. On the bench, the 3 judges that I argued for, one of them was appointed by President Lyndon Johnson. Mm-hmm. The other one was appointed by Barack Obama, and in between was another president. So we had judges on the bench from Johnson to Obama. I have never argued that kind of a broad sweep from one to the other. But Johnson, you remember, was a president back in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. This judge that he appointed and was confirmed was appointed back in the 1960s, and he's still on the bench. So long after Johnson died, he died on January 22, 1973. He died nearly 4 years ago. And so what we have here is a judge who's way outlived him and certainly outlived his presidency. So the people that the judges, people that are appointed on these benches, federal, district, the appellate court, or the U.S. Supreme Court, far outlive the legacy of the president, and that really becomes one of their major legacies.
And folks, as we're talking about not just a presidency, we're talking about a Senate. You've got representatives. How all of this plays together, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, because you could have a president nominate someone, but a Senate refuse to confirm them. So, and vice versa. So you need a Senate that is solid as well and understands their duty, not just to rubber stamp these judges, but actually to understand that we don't want legislators on the bench. We want people who will actually judge and not simply create law like a legislator does.
Now, Matt, as we see the results of this election and all the implications thereof, first of all, let's talk about how this election can affect government expansion.
Well, it can clearly affect government expansion. Look what we just had here with Obamacare. We had the shocking surprise that Chief Justice John Roberts changed his vote in the middle of writing the Obamacare decision, saying on the one hand that it's not authorized under the Commerce Clause, but by the way, it is authorized under the Taxing and Spending Clause, which makes no sense. Be that as it may, Obamacare is the largest expansion of the federal government in our modern time. It will explode the federal government's involvement in our daily life if it's not either found to be unconstitutional at some point in time, and our Liberty University Liberty Counsel case is still pending, still proceeding on the free exercise of religion challenge and other challenges to it, or if it's not repealed or defunded. If it somehow continues to move forward and go into effect, it'll be the largest intrusion of the federal government into our lives. And by the way, remember that there is one Justice, Ginsburg, who in Egypt within the last year was speaking to Egypt in the new Egyptian leaders there, which is run by the Muslim Brotherhood now, and telling them you shouldn't look at the United States as a model constitution. You ought to look at South Africa or maybe some other foreign country, but not look at the United States. So we've got a justice on the Supreme Court that is sworn to interpret and protect the Constitution, who actually is pointing other countries away from our Constitution because doesn't think our Constitution is a good model. That really ought to send shockwaves and chills down the spine of everyone who believes that our judges should be adherents of our Constitution.
Now, in your letter to us, you also mentioned this spending in the national debt. Let's get down close to that one.
Yeah, you know, in terms of where we are with $16 trillion in debt, that's not only immoral, but if you go back to, for example, Deuteronomy chapter 28, it says if you follow God and keep his commandments, you'll be a lender nation, not a debtor nation. If you don't, you'll be a debtor nation, not a lender nation. And right now we're a debtor nation, not a lender nation. But if you think about $1 trillion, just $1 trillion. We're $16 trillion now in debt and climbing. $1 trillion would take thousands, tens of thousands of years to actually accumulate $1 trillion if you spent $1 every second.
We're going to take a break right there. We're going to take a break right there, Matt, and be right back because those numbers are so big, they got me blown away. We shall return. This is Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation author and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how should we understand Genesis?
Chris, when we approach Scripture, we need to discern what the author of Scripture, God himself, is communicating to the reader. That's us, and all the readers down throughout history. There are, of course, poetic sections and parables and word pictures, but still we must try to understand what the author is saying. As it deals with creation, we must look at the written word and the world around us from God's perspective. We must value above all his ideas, the information that he gives us over our own human opinion. What we think may be elegant in our eyes, but at the very best it's fallible and short-sighted. But if we look at things from his perspective, we have a chance to get it right. If we reject his truth, we have no chance at all. Chris, let's go back to Genesis and see what it is he has for us to learn.
For more on creation, visit our website at icr.org.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where today our friend Matt Staver, friend of conservatives across the country, a friend of the church, a friend of those who uphold the Constitution, he's with us today as our special guest. And he is the founder and General Counsel of Liberty Counsel, which is reaching out across our country with a very important assignment, that is to deal with the issues and to challenge them, as there are those who'd like to strike down the very values that we hold dearly. We were in the middle of talking about the spending and the national debt and some of the mathematics there when that bumper came along. But, Matt, let's pick it up there if we can.
Well, if you think about how many seconds are in a year, a clock ticking every single second, there's only 525,600 seconds in a year. So if you spend $1 for every second in a year, you're spending half of $1 million. So it's going to take you 2 years just to get to $1 million. Now, if you're thinking of $1 trillion, how long do you think it's going to take you to actually click off $1 trillion? It's going to be...
That's 1,000 million, right?
Yeah, it's 1,000 million. So what you're looking at is about 200 and I think it was 200 and it's either in the tens of thousands, tens and tens of thousands of years that it would take you just to reach $1 trillion. Now, we can't even think of tens and tens of thousands of years, but that's just 1 trillion. We're 16 trillion. So you can't make that ground up. If it doesn't stop now, we are facing the edge of the cliff where there is absolutely no return. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we are very close to reaching a point of no return. And when we reach that, no matter what we do, no matter how much we cut, no matter how much additional revenue we raise, we simply will not be able to keep up with the growing avalanche of debt and the interest on that. And we are very close to reaching that. I can tell you that we will reach that by the end of the next president's term ending. So we're within 4 years of reaching some cliff like that. 4 to 5 years. We're very close.
You know,
when we reach it, what ultimately happens is we have a catastrophic failure. And that means, I don't know if you ever had anybody that vacationed over in Mexico many years ago. And I remember the first time I did this. And I went to a place to buy dinner. And I gave him my credit card and came back, and I saw that the dinner was like 50,000 of their dollars. It was because hyperinflation had set in, and the dollar didn't mean anything anymore. We will come to a point in time that no matter how much money you have saved, it becomes absolutely pointless. It becomes worthless, and the entire economy collapses. When that happens, guess what happens to our national security? It's gone. We have no ability to have an army. We have no ability to have loans. The entire system collapses. So we are at the point, we're on the brink of catastrophic failure.
Matt, when I think of the thousands and millions of dollars that we're sending to countries that don't like us, I think of Egypt. I think of the other countries that are receiving subsidies from us. I don't know if that's confidence money or if it's a payoff for security or whatever, where this all came from. But we're thinking of this, and then I think of the squanderment that goes on even within our own government. And I realize that this sounds like chicken feed, but in the shadow of millions and trillions. But every time our president fires up Air Force One, it's $128,000 an hour to fly that thing. And being a pilot, I have a great appreciation for airplanes, but you better have a purpose behind your flying. And
that's right, yeah.
And then you go on further and you find that the federal government is paying, and this has been verified, is paying $105,000 for an individual who is the caretaker of the president's dog.
Yeah.
And then we're doing studies, federal studies, on the sex life of a beetle and craziness like that. Matt, who's got the brakes? Who's got their foot on the brakes?
Well, right now we have nobody in Washington that has the brakes, and it starts right at the top of the list. We have no one there. You know, like I said, 1 trillion seconds. If you spent $1 every second, I just finished my calculation. It would take you 31,688 years to equal $1 trillion. 31,688 years, spending $1 every second for every moment for 31,688 years would get you to $1 trillion. Now, in the past 4 years, the deficit has doubled under this administration and has actually added multiple millions of dollars to the debt. So that's even $2 trillion would be, 64,000 years. But it's been more than that. It's been over $3 trillion, over $4 trillion. And now we're totally in debt of over $16 trillion. So that's just unfathomable. And yes, you're right. We're spending money right now. We're giving $1.3 to $1.8 billion every year to Egypt. And right now, the leadership hates us. It's the Muslim Brotherhood that's running that country. And that's the organization that started in Cairo, and it's the organization that spawned Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the terrorist organizations. So we're still giving money when we don't have it. Where are we getting it? Well, we're borrowing it from China. We just simply can't go down this path. We've got to have fiscal responsibility in the White House because it will bring this country to its knees. We have had this idea, and it goes all the way back to the Puritan preacher John Winthrop, 1630 on the ship Arbella, when the future Massachusetts Bay Colony was there. He talked about how God was establishing a community that would be a city on a hill. Ronald Reagan spoke about that shining city on a hill throughout his political career and in his 1989 farewell address. It actually begins with Jesus in the parable of the salt and light. Mm-hmm. The shining city on a hill. That shining city on a hill is that beacon. When you're on, say, the Sea of Galilee, it's that guiding light. It's that place of reference. America has been always thought of as that shining city on a hill. That's where American exceptionalism came from, that God was doing something unique in America, that it was to be a blessing and to bless the world. And people around the world, we work with them at Liberty Counsel, look to America as that shining city on a hill, that beacon, that reference point. If we fall, for example, on certain moral issues, the struggles that they're trying to preserve over there will fall as well, because they can always point to America to say, look, America is great, and they're doing this. They believe in marriage. They believe in this. They believe in that. If America falls, it has a ripple effect around the world. And so what is at stake is not just our liberties, because this debt will absolutely collapse us and destroy us so that we are completely incapable of anything. But it also has a ripple effect to really put that shining city on a hill out of light so that the light is gone, and it has a ripple effect as it goes around the world.
Well, as you were doing the math there on how many years it would take to pay at spending $1 a second, right? $1 every second. And it would be 35,000. This goes way if we were going backwards in time, this would be how many years before Christ came?
Oh, I know. Yeah, I mean, we're 2,000 years since Christ.
Yeah, right.
That's a drop in a bucket. I mean, we'd have to go 30 more thousand years beyond that.
I think it'd be pre-creation.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about before the world. So you got roughly 32,000 years spending $1 every single second, and that would only be $1 trillion.
Oh my!
And now add $6 trillion that has been added on essentially over the last 4 years. So you take that 6 times. Now you look at our $16 trillion debt, and you take 16 times 30, roughly 2,000 years. The numbers are staggering. You can't even get your mind around.
Matt, the Bible says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who will give liberally. But when we think about wisdom and the understanding of dealing with things like this, there have to be people who regard wisdom as something. And what's shocking, as I've viewed, and I'm not talking one party over another because I've seen enough mess on both sides of the aisle, we're ridiculously allowing agencies, and how many buildings that the government has that are unoccupied. They're on mothballs. There are agencies that are doing nothing but twiddling their thumbs with no purpose except that they've been there and they're part of the budget. You know, all of this, folks, is going on, and if you and I, when it comes time to elect our leaders, do not take it seriously, God will hold us accountable. Him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. And I hope and pray that everyone listening today will take this serious. Now, let's go beyond. We've got a whole bunch of things here. Let's look at welfare and the government dependence there.
Well, you know, you look at welfare and the government dependence, and what we're ultimately seeing is that we're having more and more people that are actually on some kind of government dependence. Nearly 50% of people in the United States receive some kind of check from the government. Now, that's including our veterans as well as those on Social Security and then those on various kinds of aid programs. But 50%, that's huge. I was talking to my optometrist the other day, and he said, you know, I'm looking back 40, 50 years of his life. He says, politics wasn't supposed to be this important because the government wasn't that involved in everything. Mm-hmm. But now it's in your face with everything. And it's constantly vying for your attention and constantly taking over areas that was previously given to private enterprise and private activity. And that's, in fact, what's happened. The government is continuing to grow. When you have nearly 50% of the people getting some kind of check from the government, that's huge. And then now what you're getting is Medicaid. For example, Medicaid. The Obamacare will explode Medicaid, in some cases up to 50% over what the individual states already have. They cannot sustain that. Medicaid already is a system that needs to be reformed and will ultimately collapse if it doesn't get reformed. And Medicaid already, if you look at abusers of the ER, the most frequent abuser of an emergency room, meaning that someone goes there at least 2 to 4 times a year for non-emergency treatment. They go there for a cold or something else. Guess what category that is? Mm-hmm. It's Medicaid. Medicaid recipients are the most frequent abusers of the ER, using the ER rooms for non-ER treatment. Obamacare is going to explode Medicaid, and what we're going to have is more waste with the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare.
When we look at taxation, on top of this, of course, everybody remember when it was Mr. Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes. Well, the issue of taxation, of course, has been used as a football to be thrown back and forth here in the lead up to the election.
Yeah, you know, taxes is a huge issue, and unfortunately we've had this class warfare that's been played out in the political arenas over the last series of several years in the election debates. And what we're now seeing is that why are a lot of these companies leaving the United States? Why are they going to other parts of the world? Well, in part because we have the highest corporate income tax of any other place in the world. And so these corporations, in order to actually survive, are fleeing the United States because America has the highest corporate tax rate.
We're going to be right back with Matt Staver. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
Most people devote much time researching and investigating important issues before making a decision or reaching a conclusion. Yet when faced with the most important issue of their earthly life, where will I spend eternity, they appear to be unconcerned or disinterested. Since God does not promise anyone tomorrow, and man's eternal destiny is sealed at death, would it not be wise to investigate these things? That's the purpose of the book Preparing for Eternity, in which author Mike Gendron contrasts the truth of God's Word with the teachings and traditions he was taught for over 30 years in the Roman Catholic Church. He found that eternal life is not merited by good works, but is given freely by God's grace to those who put their faith and trust in the Lord Jesus Christ as their all-sufficient Savior. The book, Preparing for Eternity, is available for a donation of $17 or more to VCY America by calling 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. As today, Matt Staver, the founder of Liberty Counsel and General Counsel, is with us today, and we have so many issues to cover. We were talking about taxation, Matt, and obviously, in order to try to gain, I mean, this is smoke and mirrors when they say no new taxes, but the argument of going back as far as the Bush tax cuts and all of the other on and off again stuff, I'm sure it's so much smoke and mirrors that the average taxpayer is bewildered.
Yeah, it is. Historically, whenever you lower taxes, you actually expand the tax base. Whenever you raise taxes, the tax base shrinks. It's just like anything else. It's just like putting a price point on some product in a store. If the price point's too high, you sell fewer of them. The price point's lower, you don't make as much profit, but you're going to sell more of them and ultimately generate more income. And the same thing happens when you lower tax rates. It actually frees up individuals to be able to work, and it actually expands the tax revenue, even though everyone is paying a lower tax. And with regards to the corporate income tax, people always want to blame corporate people, but it's the corporations, the small businesses that actually make America run on a day-to-day basis by and large. And yet we have the highest tax rate of any country in the world. And thus the reason why these corporations are going offshore and leaving the United States. We want them to be onshore. Well, if we want them to be onshore, we need to lower our corporate tax rates. They'll pay a lower tax rate. They'll be here. We'll be competitive. The United States is no longer competitive because of that. And they'll create jobs. And, take a look at our ships. Anybody ever going on a cruise lately? You ever find any ship that's registered in the United States? You just don't see them. Why? They're registered someplace else. Why? Well, because the regulation is not as burdensome as the United States. They wouldn't be able to make a living if they registered their ship in the United States because of our burdensome regulations.
Well, as we think of the taxation, we think of the regulations that are out there and the decisions being made, all of this bearing down, of course, on our lives and what's happening. But aside from the finances, of course, we're talking about the spending, the national debt, the welfare spending and finances and taxing. But there's something else here that's so important, and that's the fundamental liberties that are at stake. Where do you see those going if things go south in the election?
Well, I think that they'll go even more south what happens in terms of our liberties. Take a look, for example, at this unprecedented HHS mandate coming out of Obamacare. We argued when we filed the first private suit in the country against Obamacare on behalf of Liberty University and two private individuals that this would force employers and individuals to fund abortion. And the HHS mandate is just one example of that. For the first time in history, what we have is the federal government, through this federal law, colliding directly with the free exercise of religion. James Madison referred to religious freedom and freedom of conscience as unalienable rights. They come from God. They are not created by the First Amendment. The First Amendment just re-acknowledges their existence. And yet we've got a federal law that says that despite your objection to funding abortion, you'll have to fund abortion as an employer, even though you have a religious objection. As an individual, you have to pay for funding of abortion. Everyone will be paying their fair share, so to speak, their share of this abortion fund. Every single person, not just employers, but every person will be as well. That's just unprecedented. I think we're going to have more of that because what we have is we have someone, for example, serving on the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Kai Feldblum was appointed by the current president. And Kai Feldblum gives an example between religious freedom and the so-called lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender agenda, and says that if one of those collides with the other, guess which one wins? Not the First Amendment protected, declared free exercise of religion, but the so-called lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender agenda. That wins. If the two collide, that wins religion, and religious free exercise loses. I think you're going to see a lot more of that if we don't make a difference and vote biblical values.
Man, we were talking about finances and the shortage of taxpayers or taxes. If you have a taxpayer, you have more taxes. Okay, we have murdered 53 million taxpayers through abortion. Is it any wonder we are destitute?
And that is the biggest moral blight on America in its history, I think, in terms of our disregard of innocent human life and murdering innocent human life one every 20 seconds under this Roe versus Wade and the subsequent Supreme Court decisions. Since 1973, over 50 million. 50 million is a lot of people. There's about 23 million people in the state of Florida. You double that, and you're still a little bit short of the 50 million that we've killed since 1973. So you'd add 2 states of Florida in their population, that very populous state, and that's how many we've ultimately killed. Now, among those are not only taxpayers, but they're inventors. They're people who would be entrepreneurs. They're the Bill Gates that would start the next Microsoft. They're the doctor that would have the next invention for health care and medical treatment and breakthrough in cancer. All of those people are lumped into that. It's not just taxpayers. These are people who are entrepreneurs. I went to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is the Holocaust Museum, and they have some pictures of people who actually fled Germany at the time the Holocaust was there, and they got out just in time before they would have been thrown in the gas chambers. You know who one of those people was? Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein's picture is there with other people who ultimately left just before they would have been captured and thrown into the death chambers as well. So we have killed people like that, people that are would have been very significant in the lives and future of not just Americans, but those living around the world. And not only have we done that, but under this administration, the very first week in office, the administration decided to not abide by and set aside the Mexico City policy. That policy said we weren't going to fund abortions around the world. Well, we are now funding abortion around the world. Not only are we funding abortion around the world and the International Planned Parenthood, which propagates abortion around the world, but we're using our State Department as well. I know this because one of my friends and a professor at Liberty went to the Philippines, where they have laws that ban abortion. We are using our State Department right now, threatening the Philippines and others, to liberalize their abortion laws, and if they don't, we will withhold our federal funding from them. So they're being pushed into changing their abortion laws, and now we're also funding it in the District of Columbia, and of course now through Obamacare.
You got to be kidding!
This is a moral atrocity that just has to stop.
Here we sit, we're going to pull federal funding from them if they don't let you kill babies, and yet we will give federal funding to places like Egypt and others, squandering. Yeah. When you think of the money.
Yeah, we're giving $1.3 to $1.8 billion to Egypt, and they don't like us because of who we are. We're threatening to take away our federal money from the Philippines if they don't liberalize their abortion laws. And not only liberalize them, but also even criminalize speech that would be pro-life. They're trying to go that radical with it, using the taxpayer dollars, and they're doing it in all the foreign countries, not just the Philippines.
Matt, we are receiving calls periodically from people who say, Vic, how much longer will it be that before somebody comes along and says crosstalk's got to go off the air? We're just talking about the issue, but it's freedom of speech. And with programs like Crosstalk and many other fine programs that deal with the issues, if we do not guard our Constitution, if we do not guard our country's, our liberties, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's what we've had. But it's going down the tubes fast, folks. I'm going to open our phone lines if you'd like to talk with Matt Staver, Attorney Matt Staver, the founder of Liberty Counsel. Our phone number, 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. Matt, let's go on and talk a little bit more about, we were talking about we talked about the Supreme Court earlier. But, when we're electing the president, but the control of the Senate and the House, a lot of people don't even know who their senators are or who their representatives are.
Well, we have voter guides on Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org. They're nonpartisan voter guides. They're not going to endorse or oppose any candidate, but they will educate you about who the candidates are. And we also review other nonprofit organizations' voter guides for compliance with the IRS guidelines. So we can review those as well. But you can go to lc.org, and on the front page you'll see a number of different icons. You can click on those. We have the voter guide that goes over the different party platforms, the presidential and the Senate, and we also have other places of the House, as well as others that we'll put you in touch with as well. So you got to get informed. You know, Billy Graham just came out with a full-page ad, and he said that he's approaching his 94th birthday. He's always been very apolitical, non-political. But he says that this is the most critical election of his lifetime, and he's urging people to vote biblical values, to vote in support of Israel, to vote for religious liberty, to vote for in support of sanctity of human life, and to vote for marriage as one man and one woman. Those are all biblical values. He's not telling you who to vote for, but he is urging people to vote for biblical values. Now, it's your job to go figure out where all the different candidates stand on these values and vote accordingly.
John MacArthur has, for many years, been very apolitical as well.
Yeah.
But he has come out so strongly recently, dealing with biblical values and the fact that we cannot remain silent.
He's not only been apolitical, I would even classify him as being anti-political. He's actually preached in the past that the American Revolution was a sin, that, in fact, it was a sin because we rebelled against the instituted authorities that God had ordained. And now he ultimately says that he has come out and just completely had an amazing statement about these biblical values that are at stake. And he speaks about you can't adopt a Romans 1 platform where you replace the creator with the creature, and you ultimately engage in the results of that, which is same-sex activity, and elevate that as though it's a virtue rather than a vice. You can't actually adopt that platform, Romans 1, and expect God to bless. That is actually inviting the curse of God and the judgment of God on our country.
Matt, we're just a breath away from a bumper here, and then we're going to go to our phones after the break. But I want you to emphasize again real slowly points of contact where people can get that voter guide information. If it's possible, they can even duplicate it or put it in the hands of others. And it's not against the law to put a nonpartisan voter guide, even in a church. A lot of pastors are scared to death.
That's right. They can go to two of our websites. One is lc.org, and the other is lcaction.org, lcaction.org. On lc.org, we have all the voter guides, and you can download them, you can email them, do whatever you want to, get the information out. We're putting more up there all the time. At lcaction.org, we have some voter guides, but we also have a scorecard, and that goes over all the current House and Senate and the votes on particular issues that they've taken over the last 4 years. So you can get that and find out exactly where these individuals have voted and make your decision. It becomes very easy to educate yourself and then to vote for biblical values. But that's the way to do it, lc.org and lcaction.org.
We will be right back in 60 seconds. Our lines are jammed already. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. You often hear the term Gnosticism, or that's the teaching of Gnosticism. What does that mean? What is Gnosticism? Well, Gnosticism is the belief in discovering hidden spiritual knowledge through mystical practices. It's often associated with Eastern religions. Gnosticism also, though, holds to the idea that salvation is not gained exclusively through the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and that truth can be obtained through these mystical experiences and practices. In other words, yoga would be an idea of mysticism, the idea of entering into the spiritual realm, dissolving the natural realm, and eventually finding your spiritual truth through a mystical practice like yoga. Contemplative prayer, breath prayer, centering prayers, soaking prayers, well, that's really transcendental meditation by another name. It's an idea of getting truth through a mystical practice. This is also known as Gnosticism. For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House.
Okay, well, we've got phone lines jammed from one side of the board to the other here, and we're going to put you right on here with Matt Staver. First of all, we're going to go to Brad in Crivets, Wisconsin. And Brad, you are on the air with Matt Staver. Go ahead.
Hi, Vic. Hi, Matt. I wanted to address the idea, you covered it a little bit earlier about people not voting, particularly people who call themselves Christians. And they say, well, I'm not going to vote because so-and-so is not a Christian, or so-and-so is not 110% pro-life, only 98, and all that, you know. And I've got something to say here. In Luke 12:48, it talks about the servant that was beaten with many stripes versus the one that was beaten with few. Mm-hmm. And it says, for unto whomsoever is given much, much is required. Well, these people who don't want to vote are probably thinking, we're not given very much. Okay, I'll agree with that. But nowhere does it say nothing is required. Something is still required. If you're given less, then it's less. But do what's required. Because if you go and sit home and don't vote, or you vote for somebody that's not really in the running, you've just done nothing.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. We're not going to have anyone perfect on the ballot unless Jesus Christ runs, and he's certainly not running for any office. He's King of Kings. So what we have to do is to vote for the person that at best advances our values, and then, again, work in between times to get someone who better advances our values, and just keep on moving one brick at a time. That's what we've got to do. But voting is a talent. It's a privilege that we have been given, and I think God will hold us accountable for either not voting or voting non-wisely. It is a talent. We can't bury it in the ground. We can't use it unwisely. Burying it in the ground is just not voting. Using it unwisely is another way, casting it contrary to biblical values, because we're electing an agent to act on our behalf, and we've got an elected agent that's consistent with those biblical values that we believe.
Fred in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Fred, you're on the air.
Yes, thanks. If we go off the debt cliff with the paper physical and gold, silver, and any other metals that are precious and are used for currencies in the world, won't it make it easier in 4 years to bring in the cashless society and using debt and credit card type things for the New World Order?
Oh, it would make it a lot easier for a lot of things, but none of them are certainly going to be beneficial to any of us. So, yeah, I think it would be absolutely destructive to America and to our values. George Washington, in his second farewell address, said that the twin pillars of America were religion and morality. Anybody who labors to undermine them is unpatriotic. This debt crisis is unpatriotic. It will ultimately crumble the very foundation of America.
Ben in Pensacola, Florida. Ben, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I have a question for Dr. Matt.
Yes.
Yes.
Where do the Chinese get the money to loan the U.S., and why are the Chinese not in debt? And my third question is, have you read the book Hurling Toward Oblivion by Richard A. Swenson, M.D.? And I got that book through Crosstalk and listened to your station.
No, I'm not familiar with it, but if you got it through Crosstalk, I know it would be a good book. And but as it relates to where China gets their money, China is a growing economy. Interestingly, even though it's repressive, it's coming into more free enterprise as free enterprise goes in that particular country. Don't get me wrong; it's not a free enterprise country. But I just listened to a program recently about some people who came from China to the United States, and when they first came to the United States, they sent money back to their relatives in China. They took old jeans back and gave it to them, and people were very happy. Now what they find is that when they go back there, they're not taking their family out to dinner. Their people in China are insisting that they pay for the dinner. They're living in bigger homes in China than the people are that migrated to the United States. So there is a change that's happening in China because there's so many people. So many people are going to China to start businesses and so forth. And China is going to become the great leader economically and outpace the United States, whereas we've always been that standard bearer. We're losing that position, and we've got to regain it.
Alan, let's see. Yes, it's Alan in Antigo, Wisconsin. Alan, first of all, before your question, do you have a TV set there in Antigo?
No, I don't. But anyway, my question is about gold and silver.
Okay, I'll tell you what. The reason I asked is that we have a TV station that's now serving the Antigo area. 30.1 is the signal, and it's a VCY TV station as well.
You do? Okay, I didn't know that.
Just recycle your TV set, and you'll have it. Okay, go ahead. You got the
question. Question here?
Absolutely.
It's really crucial to me. I'm one that believes in having reserve currency, something of intrinsic value like gold and silver, or if our currency isn't worth anything. Wouldn't that be a tradable thing, precious metals, if our currency dumps?
Well, it would be, certainly, and that I think it was a mistake for us to go off of the gold standard and go into this other standardless kind of monetary system where we are right now. But certainly it would be, and, there's a lot of people. I'm not a financial expert, so I'm not going to tell you how to invest or what to buy. But certainly that could be possible. But then again, if nobody has any money to be able to buy it, despite the fact that your gold seems very profitable, if people don't have any money because hyperinflation has set in, it's not going to be valuable to anybody else either.
Thank you, Alan in Antigo. Jim in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. You're on the air. Hello, Jim.
Thanks. Hi. A couple of things. I think, first of all, I pray that this president is not reelected. I think if he is, the handwriting's pretty much on the wall. And perhaps it'll be the one thing that will cause this nation to wake up, at least the believers in the nation. I think one thing people have to understand, though, if we are heading toward an economic collapse, it's inevitable if we don't see something dramatically change right now. I don't know if either party has the stomach to do that or the American people do. And what that means, if America collapses, we are still the largest supplier of the gospel in the world. We finance the gospel as no other nation. And if that dries up, people around the world, especially our brothers and sisters, are going to be in dire needs, more so than they even are now. So that's
an example exactly of what I was talking about before, the shining city on a hill. If we collapse economically, all of those missionaries that we support, also that pipeline of support collapses as well. It has a catastrophic impact, and it has a catastrophic impact around the world because of the values that America has always stood for. That pipeline will be cut off from around the world.
Matt, we're at the end of the program. One more time on the Liberty Counsel contact points.
They can go to Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org, lc.org, or lcaction.org, lcaction.org, or they can call 800-671-1776, 800-671-1776.
God bless you, Matt. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the Internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.